And we are live with another episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome back once again. Ken just said another episode. He forgot that it was 77, I guess. I don't know.
I probably did.
He probably did. He's trying to change things up. We're super excited to be back today. We've got Clint here to talk all things DevSecOps and TLDRSec and security in general. And we'll get into that shortly. Outside of that, I guess it's holiday time, so happy holidays, whichever holiday you guys seem to, or you guys celebrate. At the very least, having a couple weeks off is always a good thing from a burnout perspective, right? We can talk about that too, because as a consultant, I'm kind of feeling it right now between all the different projects and people that are coming in. I'm sure Clint is as well.
Just a busy time.
Yeah, fourth quarter always gets crazy. So. Yeah, take some time off and enjoy that. As far as other stuff that's going on, I will be at CactusCon at the end of this week. So Friday, Saturday, if people are around, feel free to hit me up. I will have a couple Absolute AppSec shirts, at least some stickers, some other swag if people are interested. Hacker Tracker does have the schedule for CactusCon in it. If you know of other conferences that you want in Hacker Tracker, please let me know. Just ping me on Twitter or DM me. My DMs are open, and we'd love to add additional conferences. We got a whole bunch in there, but any of the B-Sides conferences or anything, if you feel like the conference wants it, let us know. Outside of that, we will be at DevSecOps Days in a couple of weeks in Austin. Ken and I are doing a live version of the podcast, and we'll see how that goes because it's live and not our home turf. So, yeah. I'm going to put it all on
T-shirts.
Yeah, we brought T-shirts, or we will bring T-shirts.
We bought T-shirts. Will we have T-shirts for that conference?
I don't know. I'm waiting to see when they actually show up. So hopefully, at the very least, we'll I'll have like 2 or 3, but hopefully we'll have a plethora.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's about it for the end of the year. I am doing a secure code review workshop, or I don't know, I'm just calling it like hands-on secure code review for B-Side San Francisco. It's not our full course. This is basically bring an open source project and we're all going to look at code together, right, in the small group. So, Clint was in the course a couple years ago, and like that last half the day where we're actually analyzing applications, that's what we're going to try and do, just as kind of a condensed. If you've never done it before, come to it and try and review some code with us, and we can give you pointers and stuff like that. But it's more workshop, just the hands-on portion. We don't necessarily walk through everything like we do in the full course. But yeah, that's February timeframe. Anyway, so I think that's everything from our side. I know we've been getting questions about when we're going to do the full course next. I don't have an answer for that yet, Ken, unless you do.
No, yeah, a couple of people had asked about where we're doing it, and we haven't really submitted anywhere yet, I don't think, just because we were both kind of like fried and taking a break. We'll probably start submitting stuff. But the other thing that was asked, which I think is a good thing to do, is to add to our website a section on where the course will be available next, and maybe just like keeping people up to date on cool things happening, like conferences or whatever. So, anyways. That has been taken under consideration, and we think it's a good idea, and I think we're going to do it in 2020. So
yeah. Hopefully over the break we'll be able to restructure the website a little bit, and at the very least we could show upcoming episodes as well and guests. So we've got a kind of a schedule there that people can plan on rather than just watching the Twitter feed. So. Cool. All right. Well, we've been officially talking for 4 or 5 minutes, but now we want to introduce Clint. We met Clint, I think for the first time, Clint, at that course at AppSec USA a couple years ago in San Francisco, right?
Yeah, I think it was through that. I do a fair amount of code review as a security consultant, and I was wanting to see other people who are, experienced in the space. What's their methodology? How do they think about it? I took your guys' course, thought it was fun, and had some good tips. And I think over lunch or some things like that, we started hanging out.
Yeah.
and then saw you at a bunch of other conferences. So
Yeah. Yep. It's funny how that works, right? And I don't have the notes up. Ken, do you want to kind of walk through?
Oh yeah. And well, I was gonna say, Clint, too, your feedback, because you asked great questions, but also you like gave us feedback that was really helpful in incorporating and improving upon the course after that. Because that was our first time doing it, and so a lot of the things that you had mentioned, we actually ended up building into the course. So that was really awesome. But
yeah,
if you don't know, it was awesome. Like your feedback was really useful. If you don't know Clint, he's a research director and technical director from NCC, which we'll get into your backstory, and we'll definitely like here in a second hear how you got to get into consulting and security and the last 4 years at NCC, and a little bit about what you do. But if you don't know Clint has, well, first of all, I just signed up for his newsletter, TLDRSec. I signed up for it, I think, this weekend, and it's pretty cool. Like, you definitely should subscribe. We're going to put a link up here shortly to it. Clint's also spoken a lot, and has, I think, where was the last place you spoke, Clint?
I think
was it Tel Aviv?
Yeah. Well, I gave a closing keynote at DevSecCon Tel Aviv, and then the week after, moderated a panel at DevSecCon London.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, that was like 2 or 3
and how
ago.
like London this time of year? How's that?
It's a little bit rainy. Not as cold as you would expect. I actually came back to the Bay Area, which is where I live, and it was a similar temperature.
Oh, okay. So it was not too bad then.
I guess that's true. You live in the Bay Area. There's always, it's always a little cloudy, rainy there this time of year, right?
I put the link up to his TLDRSec, by the way.
Sweet, good. Yeah, that'll be good. I mean, London's always interesting. I mean, it seems, Clint, that you've been more in the like you're a security consultant, but you've been playing a lot in kind of the DevOps, DevSecOps area, rather than strict application security, at least recently, like the talks and other things that you've been giving. And I know you moderated a panel at AppSec US or AppSec Cali last year, and a couple other places on kind of DevOps and DevSecOps, building security into that. With I can't remember who else was on it, Asta and a couple of others. So it's kind of interesting to see how the industry like it continues to silo almost, right? As far as there's all these different aspects to security, and we can concentrate on, hey, application security, but then also like how that builds, like the build pipeline is really this DevSecOps pipeline affects security. But yeah, like it's just been interesting to kind of watch how the different aspects of that play in different places, right? Maybe let's just dive straight into kind of your background, how you got into security, how you got into DevSecOps and application security in general, where you kind of grew up and how it all started for you.
Sure. So I got into security actually by accident. I went to college to major in computer science because I really liked video games, and I thought I wanted to build video games professionally. So that was like my impetus of being a computer scientist. But I sort of two things happened at the same time. One is I took this intro to video game programming course, which I thought was going to be, the most amazing class ever. But then it ended up making me realize that actually real game programming is like a lot of math and a lot of like vector multiplication, and I think different roles within the industry, like you don't have to focus on that stuff. But I sort of realized it was like, this is a lot of stuff I don't really want to do. And then also at the same time, I was realizing that a lot of people in the game industry, basically work 80, 90-hour weeks mandatory, like every week. Yep. And there's, I think, at least my impression, I'm not in that industry, but from what I can perceive, it seems like not the healthiest of industries in terms of like longevity, work-life balance, and things like that. Yeah. So that's sort of one thing.
Yeah, and before you move on, that's an interesting point, because I always get this, especially with like the high school, like early college crowd, when they come to me and they're like, hey, we know you're in tech. Like, I want to go, like, I want to go into programming. I want to become a game developer. And I'm like, no. Like, my advice is continually, no, you really don't. Because I see the people that are in there, or I see like the QA testers down. Like, I remember going to, a Sony, installation at one point where they were doing the PlayStation.com stuff and watching those QA testers. It just looked like their life was miserable, right? I mean, and that's kind of my impression. I know there's companies out there that aren't necessarily that bad, but that's always my advice. Is I'm like, let's look at something else, because most likely you're not going to enjoy it as much as you think. So it's validating to hear that was your experience as well. So, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I've seen. I feel like it is a little bit like the screen industry, like acting and directing and stuff for film, because there are so many people who want to do it that there's a lot of pressure on sort of a small number of roles. And also the people who are sort of already entrenched and in power can thus sort of take advantage of, or at least expect a lot from newcomers, because so many people want to and there's so few roles. Right, like if you want to be like an actor, actress, or director or something, like there's like a handful of major studios who have sort of most of the power. Similarly, there's a handful of major game publishers. There's like a couple of indie players, but there's maybe 5 or so major game companies, maybe 10. So anyway, so basically it was like, oh, this is something I don't like to do as much as I thought. Plus, am I really going to enjoy this life? Well, at the same time, my college, Case Western, only had one computer security class, and it was a graduate class. But I just decided to sit in on it. I was like a freshman or sophomore undergrad, just because I was like, what is this security thing? It sounds cool. And I basically just immediately fell in love with it. And every like internship and everything after that, I was just trying to learn more about it. So it was basically totally accident. I just sat in on this class and I was like, man, this is awesome. And that's basically what I've been trying to learn more about ever since.
Cool. Well, that's pretty, yeah. I mean, the paths that people have into security are always fairly interesting, right? Because it's not, I mean, there's those that did it as, teenagers or whatever, and have been doing it for 30 some odd years, but most of us seem to tap into it somewhere along the line and then decide, hey, no, I really like this, and move that direction. So did you do some internships and stuff then related to security, during your college years, or was it, after that you finally got into it?
Yeah, so I did I did 2 internships at a subsidiary of Northrop Grumman, which is like a big defense contractor. So I'm from Cincinnati, and they this place called like Northrop Grumman Zetron, which is like the most like techie sounding place ever. But they had a place in Cincinnati, so I was like, oh, I can still spend some time with my family while also learning about security. And then I think my junior year summer, I interned at Cigital, which is a security consulting firm that got swallowed by Synopsys a few years ago. Okay,
cool. So did you spend some years? So how long did you spend at Synopsys or at Cigital before, after you got done with school, or was that with just the internship period?
That was just an internship.
Okay, all right, cool. And then so getting done with college. Having that experience, did that help in actually finding a full-time security gig, or did you do some programming along the lines? What happened there?
Yeah, so school was pretty much all just like strictly programming and computer science, and then it was more like trying to learn security on my own / through internships.
Okay.
When I graduated, I wasn't sure if I was ready to be a full real person doing real things. So I decided to go to grad school, because that's what you do when you want to hide away in the warm bosom of academia for a few more years. So I wasn't like Cleveland. I thought it would be nice to be a bit warmer. So then I applied to schools on the West Coast, and then ended up going to University of California, Davis for grad school. Okay.
Also in program or computer science?
Yeah, in computer science, but like a focus in security. Basically, I looked at where are programs that have good computer security professors, and then applied to a couple of those.
Okay, cool. So was there a specific like computer security was the emphasis? Was there a specific topic then that you focused on during that time? I always have this. I mean, I did computer science in school, but I finished after 4 years. When it came down to it, I started actually working and as a developer and a system administrator, and like moved away from it. But I'm always interested to see, because I feel as a security industry, we're pretty lax. Like our conferences, that most of the talks and other things aren't necessarily, they don't have an academic rigor to them, right? So I'm always interested to hear what's coming out of the universities, what people have worked on, especially in those graduate degrees. Not necessarily that the security industry needs to follow academic rigor, because I do feel like there's some cons to that, as in the industry as a whole, right? But there's also some disciplines that we could gain if we followed that. So actually, what did you study there, or what was your main focus in the security space?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, which would be interesting to chat about. But so I didn't know what area of security specifically I wanted to focus in when I showed up. I sort of had to figure that out.
Yeah.
I ended up doing a couple of projects in mostly mobile security, like Android specifically.
Okay.
So some colleagues and I built some tools to analyze Android APKs for various properties, like are they accessing your sensitive information and sending it off the phone using static analysis. Comparing like many applications, do they have a lot of code reuse? Like, are they plagiarized? And then trying to measure sort of the impact of the plagiarism in practice in terms of like lost revenue
cool.
and things like that. And also understanding like, why are people plagiarizing? Is it, are they just trying to localize? Is it they're adding malware? Is it for like doing ad fraud type stuff? And just like various interesting, like I think we ended up writing crawlers for Google Play and like 13 third-party markets, like English as well as like Russian, Chinese, and like others. And you find some interesting things crawling third-party app stores.
Oh, I'm sure, right? Like, that sounds fascinating.
Did they like with I'm assuming that it's a noticeable amount of requests. Were you ever throttled? Did they ever reach out and be like, hey, what are you doing, or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. So as with anything, there's definitely a cat and mouse game. If you download too aggressively from Google Play, we would get our accounts banned and we'd have to create new accounts. That happened a number of times. I think there was one third-party market, I forget which one, but we crawled a little bit too aggressively, and I think they like banned our IP range of our lab. So just like,
I've heard of that happening. That's why I was asking, like, if you ran into issues, and it sounds like you did, because I've heard that more than once, where people like have issues with that. So
yeah, a couple times. After that happened once or twice, we tried to like add some rate limiting to the crawler, so it would only do like 1 a minute or something like that.
Interesting.
Smart.
Cool.
Like a little sleep function thrown in there.
Yeah, it was very advanced. It was like sleep 60 seconds.
Super leap.
That's most security development right there, right? It's a bash shell script.
That's most development in general, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, Seth, to go to something you mentioned regarding like academia versus industry.
Yeah.
I think there are some interesting differences. Like I spent some time in both, and like reasonably involved in like sort of the conference scene in both. And I think there's definitely strengths as well as cons of both. Like as you said, I think academia is nice in that there's a huge amount of emphasis placed on doing like a related work survey in terms of what's useful for or how does my work fit into the broader scheme of things in terms of what have other people done over the past like 1 to 5, even 10 years in this space. So when you read a paper, you can see, oh, this is the unique contribution of this work. Also, I understand sort of how it fits into the broader scheme of things, where I think maybe it's partially a culture difference or partially maybe just people are busy. I don't know, but that's, I think, much less a focus in industry. And then so like on the other side, I think industry is great at choosing problems and producing things that are like immediately actionable and useful. Whereas in academia, I think a lot of the value is placed on novelty, like being original, rather than necessarily solving an objective problem someone has today. So I think both have things that are better than the other, and I think that it would be valuable for them to learn from each other.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that's always what I've like. Well, that's always what I've seen, right? Like, having gone to more industry conferences on, during my career, is like some of the attribution and knowing where things fit. It's very hard from to read a black hat or a DEF CON description of a talk and know exactly where it fits within. All right, what's the unique play here? Unless you have already done a deep dive into that topic. So it's very easy on the AppSec side to be like, oh, okay, that's kind of some new original research, as opposed to, exploit development or something like that. I look at some of those talks and I'm like, all right, this might be interesting to me, but how much of this is new versus, a replay and, really what's going on there. And then besides the fact, like, I don't want to get into the whole, like, red team exploit, worship that we do in the security industry, right? We were getting away from it, but a lot of the conferences, that seems to be the play that we run into there.
For sure.
And then as well as, like, when I talk about academic rigor, things like attribution, things like, quoting sources or, where we got material. So someone that is looking at a conference talk or even a conference slides could go back and actually recreate the research. That is always something that I find lacking is, hey, it's great that you put all this material together, but at the very least, there's some basics that go into it, right? None of us operate in a vacuum where we've created this all by ourselves. So, I mean, that's where I find use, like in the TLDRSec, in the other newsletters, in the other, like even, the OWASP website does a better job of actually calling out places that aren't necessarily OWASP, as far as, hey, this is where the original research came from, or something else along those lines. So blogs, Medium posts, others are easier than the conference talks in general. So,
yeah, actually, TLDRSec sort of happened organically out of I've been giving a number of talks in DevSecOps where I was basically trying to collect and condense sort of the interesting, useful insights from like tens of other talks and sort of put them in one place so that people, one, like, know they exist, and then also can sort of like, take the tips and apply them ideally in their company. So I was having a bunch of talks that were referencing like 20 to like 30 or 40 other talks. And then I was like, oh, I should like write these down somewhere else just to make it easier to absorb, because, I'm spending a lot of time watching them and learning from them. So I should make that easier for other people too. So yeah, it just sort of happened accidentally.
No, I mean, that's where the best things happen, right? Like that kind of organic growth, the organic, hey, this was useful to me, and then, sharing it out with the community. That always seems to go better than something that's just strictly, marketing speak or marketing related. So how is the, I know we're getting away from your origin story, but it's fine. As far as TLDRSec goes, how has the response to it been? I mean, obviously it's something that, like, we're talking about it and Ken and I have found useful, but the industry at large, what kind of response have you gotten to that?
Yeah, so I feel very fortunate because the response has actually been really good. With a ton of
Clint? Did we
people
lose him?
who I've like never met before randomly email me or like send me a tweet or something like, hey, I really got a lot of value out of this, or like this saved me like a bunch of time and I forwarded it to our team, or like I shared it in our AppSec Slack channel, which I don't know, I think you guys probably feel the same way in terms of, you're doing Absolute AppSec because you love it and it's fun, and then people reach out to you and say like, hey, this really helped me, and you're like, your heart grows 3 sizes.
Yeah. Not quite the Grinch we once were. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if Seth, or if we ever talked, I don't know if we've talked about this, but the whole reason we are doing this podcast and we do the training. Well, I mean, we both had like super stressful positions before making a jump. And then like we kind of both agreed we just do stuff that was fun. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing, like, which is, I enjoy it. It's useful to other people. As long as somebody else finds use and it's remains fun, we'll keep doing it. And I think that's kind of sounds like what you're doing. And it's also like whenever you build a product that like a product, whether it's a newsletter or a podcast or whatever, if it's filling something like a specific need that you had, and like you would use that thing, then it's always gonna be a good idea to do it. I mean, regardless of how popular it gets, it's a good idea to do it, I think.
Yeah.
And then like Chris Gates, when he talked about blogging, he made a good point, which was he did that because he was writing down all these notes and like he just wanted somewhere easy to go back and reference, like, how do I do post requests with SQL Map, or how do I do this configuration thing with Burp or Metasploit, and the rest is history. It was a super popular blog, so I don't know what that rant was about, but yeah, you're
totally
doing good stuff.
It's that's definitely something I've noticed as well, where I'll I'll go back and reference my own notes. I'm like, there was this one tool that did something like this, where was this? And then I just like look back to what I wrote and I'm like, oh yeah, thank you, pass me.
Yeah. As oftentimes as I curse the pass me because of scheduling. 7 a.m. flight, that sounds fine, right?
Dude, that is the one time that always comes back to bite you. You're like, and I'll get to wherever I want to go early and get some time to, and then you just like you're up at 4 o'clock in the morning, like, what in the hell did I do? What horrible chain of decisions led to this moment?
Yep.
Anyways.
Yes. Well, it's good to hear that that it's taking off and it's growing, because it is a useful. It's a useful tool. It's useful to see what other people are doing and what's going on there. Like your view into the industry, your take on what's going on is obviously different than ours, just because the people that we follow, the people that we know, are different. And so, from my perspective, it's been it's been very, very useful, very informative. So good job on that.
Thank you. And feel free to send feedback, positive or negative. One thing that's also been cool is I'll share like 1 or 2 links on a specific topic, like, I don't know, reverse engineering or something. And then someone will send me a tweet or an email like, oh, hey, there's this other thing that's similar to that thing. Have you heard of this? And I'm like, oh, no, I had no idea. So it's sort of like a mutual conversation of discovery, where I'm sharing some things and then people are like, oh, here's this other cool thing. And then, we all share together. So it's pretty cool.
Cool. Good. Good. Sweet. So any hot topics that you have coming out of TLDRSec?
Yes. Give us a preview of any.
Come on, give us a preview. What's on your mind right now? What are you working on?
Yeah. So I guess, I'm sending out another one tomorrow if I get it done. There's a bunch of like cloud security stuff and a bunch of like free books on some different things that's pretty cool. I think one trend that I keep writing about that I never intended to is asset inventory, which is sort of like a blanket term that I think means different things to different people. But to me, it's basically like, as a company, understanding what you control and sort of where it is. So some people may say, oh, this is only our external attack service. Other people may say, oh, I also include, say, like the phones and laptops of our employees, as well as maybe like our code repos, and then how code moves from GitHub to Jenkins to testing to production, and sort of like everything all the way through. So to me, different people think it means different things, but there's been a lot of companies who are trying to basically give people deep like X-ray vision into everything they control in real time. There was like 1 or 2 companies doing it, and then in the past like 1 to 2 years, there's like 30 companies doing it. And every newsletter, I'm like, okay, this is the last time I'm going to write about asset inventory. And then I see like 2 or 3 more links, and I'm like, I should probably mention these 2.
When you say it means different things to different people, were you talking about like when you just mentioned, there's an external surface, or like, are you saying like what they care about, like external only or external facing only? Or do you mean like the term inventory asset might be like a different thing for different people?
Yeah, I think sort of like maybe DevSecOps. I think it's like a hyped up term that I think different people use, and in their minds they think different things. Like one, so I guess to give you some concrete examples, I feel like there's a couple of like buckets of asset inventory or asset discovery type companies. So one is like, what is your external attack surface? So they're using, like certificate transparency, OSINT, subdomain brute forcing, and stuff like that to get an idea of like what you control externally. And this is all done like black box. So that's like one bucket. Another bucket is you give it like an AWS read-only key, and you give it an API key to your GitHub or GitLab on-prem, and you give it access to your internal systems, and then basically it hits a bunch of different APIs and builds like a graph of all the things you own and shows you sort of the relationships between things. Sasha from Lyft gave a talk about Lyft Cartography, a tool they open source that basically does that. And there's maybe like one or two other groups, but I think each of those buckets say that they're like asset inventory or asset discovery, but sort of how they do it and what they focus on is very different.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so for bug bounties, I know NCC has done a bit of work with like triaging bug bounties. So you might already know this, and Seth, I'm not sure if you know this, but subdomain takeovers or dangling subdomains is like a super popular thing for bug bounty researchers, and not only just finding a list of like, okay, these are subdomains I can claim, but then like, your site references maybe some JavaScript on this subdomain site that's no longer, or CSS or something that's no longer working. They take over the site and claim the domain, and now you've got these assets being pulled in. I don't know, like there's many ways you could exploit that, and I feel like that's a big bounty researcher area, is finding those dangling subdomains.
Yeah, I think I saw a post or two about it for maybe like Detectify or maybe Portswigger or something a couple of years ago, and then it seems like that's everywhere. Once one or two people posted about that, that definitely is an issue that seems to affect a lot of people for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of become like an interesting thing to see what bounty researchers are focused on, like what's getting them paid.
Yeah, I always feel like in the bounty space, right? Like there's kind of a feedback loop that happens there, right? As soon as one person gets paid on it, then like they blog about it, they tell their friends, the rest of them start looking for it. So obviously they discover more of those issues, and then it like escalates from there. And then all of a sudden, like, I mean, you talk about Detectify and AssetNote and a couple others that like, that's what they developed these scripts that they were able to do subdomain takeover or identify subdomains. And then all of a sudden they're selling it as a product to the companies on the other hand, right? So it's this feedback loop that happens. In general, right? Like we talk about SSRF, we talk about subdomain takeovers, right? It seems to happen again and again. And it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but it definitely is, right? Like I always wonder kind of what's next, right? You watch what's coming out of Portswigger and James Kettle, and you're always like, okay, all right, well, it looks like we got to brush up on X, Y, and Z because he released a talk on this and found a couple of things, and then so that's what the bug bounty guys are going to jump on next, right? But like it's not always the most original research, but it does. I mean, it obviously has an effect. So
yeah, I think a lot of bug bounty trends over the past maybe 2 to 3 years have been step one, James Kettle gives a black hat talk on a new attack technique and releases the burp plugin. Step two, every bug bounty researcher reports this on every different bug bounty platform. Step three, like he does another one or something.
Step three, they profit, and they sell more burp licenses, right? Yeah,
and like the second one bounty researcher gets paid for that, like everybody just copies and pastes their write-up once it's disclosed and just submits the same thing to different companies. It's the craziest thing. Mm-hmm. It's like a hive, like a swarm.
Yeah, you probably see that at GitHub, I guess. Lots of like similar type things, perhaps.
Yeah, well, you deal with a lot of the good and bad and in between of bounties. So this is an interesting. I was looking at this cartography tool, by the way. It's super interesting. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
check it out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I did. So, Clint, I did want to ask because we didn't quite get through your whole background and everything, but I know you're currently at. I think we're allowed to talk about NCC Group, right?
Yeah,
That's
sure.
what you're. Okay, so you're a consultant at NCC Group, but it sounds like your title isn't necessarily consultant anymore. It's more R&D. So, can you talk to kind of what your role has been like? Because I know you were doing secure code review in the past, and that's how we met, obviously. But what have you done there? Kind of what your role is now, what your job is.
Yeah. So just to make sure everyone's aware, so NCC Group is a like international security consulting firm. We do pretty much anything related to security. So our bread and butter is doing like web app pen tests or external or internal network pen tests, looking at mobile apps, and then we do like this super long tail of like crypto reviews, hardware reviews, looking at devices before they're public. Like cryptocurrency stuff, like low-level embedded stuff, like attacking AI or ML systems, like pretty much like anything. We do it. Red team, physical pen testing. But I was doing more like web app security and like network security. That was sort of the main things I worked on. And I still am doing a fair amount of like hands-on keyboard security testing.
Okay.
But because of some of the research I've been doing and talks I've been giving, I also do a little bit more sort of like strategic work with companies where they're like, oh, hey, where does it make sense for us to focus on in terms of, we have like this many security people and this much money. How do we scale our security efforts? What makes sense to invest in? Like, should we do more static analysis? Should we stop doing that and like build some libraries? Or basically, how do we apportion resources such that we are getting sustainable, systematic wins over time? So that's really what I found very interesting. So I still do some pen testing, but I also help advise programs in terms of like where should you go over the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, such that like that day you've just like solved classes of problems that you just like don't have to deal with anymore.
Is that general security program or like web specific, or is it just encompassing of web and mobile?
I would say like general SDLC stuff.
Okay.
I tend to know more about the AppSec side, but there's also obviously like a network and infrastructure component to it as well.
Are you finding, because I feel like we've talked about this the last few episodes, or guests have talked about this. Do you feel that from the AppSec side, as you help out with the SDLC, that you do enter more of the infrastructure space with like cloud and infrastructure as code?
Yeah, they're definitely less separate than they used to be, which is interesting. Yeah, I think infrastructure as code is definitely a huge win from a security point of view in terms of like reproducibility, being able to like, burn things to the ground and spin it up again. So you don't have a lot of one-off changes and fixes everywhere. Yeah, but then at the same time, it's like, oh, well, now, maybe it is config files you're reviewing, but you still need to have an understanding of like cloud platforms in order to make like sane recommendations.
Yeah. So is there some sort of methodology or anything that you use in that kind of advisement, right? Like we had Brian Glass on last week, and he was talking about OWASP SAM and OpenSAM and BSIM. Are you based on some of that, or is there something else that you've kind of come up with over your career?
Yeah, so we at NCC have like our own sort of custom thing, and I have a little bit of my own custom interpretation as well. But recently, we've been a pretty big fan of OpenSAM. Actually, we think that it like I think OpenSAM v2 or something is like just maturing and going to be official or whatever soon. Yeah, we like that. Yeah, so partly existing standards, and then partly like one thing I like to do is just basically look at everything you're doing as a AppSec program and like, okay, you're using these tools. These are the various security controls you have and when they're applied, and then sort of combine that with what vulnerability classes have you had over the past, say, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, either in like one specific set of applications or across the board? And then just try to figure out like why are those things happening, and are we using our existing tools not optimally, or should we be using different tools or building our own things that again try to like attack sort of the things we're actually experiencing in practice?
Yeah.
You might have a tool that's like good at 7 things, but the actual 3 things that matter to you, like it's not good at, so like it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always find kind of that custom approach is definitely what moves the needle for a security program, right? Every time that we've tried to just implement, Fortify, right, as a source code analysis scanner, right? The first couple passes with that have always been, all right, we found a bunch of stuff that we don't really care about, right, as an organization, and now we need to go and actually tune it to, these are the 4 things. Let me know if any of those things happen, because that actually affects the security of our application and our posture, as opposed to, those, yeah. I mean, if you've dealt with static analysis tools, that the stuff that comes back from there is, they're my favorite, kind of, whipping, I don't know, whipping boy, I don't know, whatever you want to say, right? Punching bag, right, on the podcast. Even though I really appreciate like how difficult the problem is, it's still,
yeah. I've done a number of projects specifically with like checkmarks, Fortify, tools like that. And yeah, you're totally right. It's not the free win that everyone thinks or wants it to be.
Yep.
Like it never is. I've never seen it be like, oh, I just like added this SAS tool and like send the troops home. Job well done. Yeah, but customizing it takes a fair amount of work. It can provide value, but yeah, like depends on the tech stack and the development processes and like which tool and.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I know this came out a couple weeks ago. The new Flan tool from Cloudflare. Right? Yeah, and that's like, I know it blew up on InfoSec Twitter because it's just Nmap and da 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 da. But like, this is a good point. Like, I looked at it from the perspective of, all right, like if you read the blog post from Cloudflare, it was, hey, we're spending a whole ton of money on vulnerability scanners, right? And this speaks exactly to what you're talking about. And they're like, we don't get that value back out of it. At the very least, like, we get the same value out of using Nmap, managing it with these scripts, like this tool that they've released, and actually like tuning down to what they're interested in, because they have a specific set of threats that they're trying to mitigate. And I mean, this is the same thing that we talk about all the time in the code review course, right? Like, what are the top priorities for this code base? What are the risks that are associated with our organization, our application? That's what we want to go after. Because if we knock off the top 5 there, then the rest of them, yeah, we can get to it eventually, but it doesn't affect the application. It doesn't affect our code base. And so like, yeah, so I'm just saying that it speaks to what you're saying as well. Like, they've tried to implement a tool that specifically goes after the risks that they're associated with, and they took a lot of crap for it. But I still think the approach is valid.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that what they've done is actually pretty insightful in that. So the thing is, like, it doesn't matter how fancy or complex the tool is, right? It matters like how useful it is to you. So like, and ultimately a lot of it's about ROI. So yeah, basically what you're saying, I totally agree. Like, you could, let's say you're spending, like $100,000 a year for some network vulnerability scanner, but with say Flan, you get like 80% of that coverage for free, right? And it's also not just sort of like vulnerability coverage. It's also, what is the time involved? So let's say you have this nice automated setup for Flan. You can deploy it everywhere. It aggregates results, and you can slice and dice them in like, quick scripts super easily. But then let's say this commercial tool, someone has to run it manually because it doesn't have an API. The results are like poorly formatted, so it takes you forever to like mess with them. And basically, like, not only is it more expensive, it's also more AppSec engineer time, which is also money. And there's also an opportunity cost there in terms of, the people running that tool are not doing other things that could be more important. So I think that one thing I actually advise clients a lot is like, is there an easy sub-problem you could tackle that just takes much less work and you can do more precisely and effectively than trying to like boil the whole ocean? So that was like a very long-winded way to say, like, I agree with you.
No, I mean that's a good way to think about it.
I think we're getting a little bit of echo.
Yeah. Quite.
Oh, from me? I think
so.
Okay.
Sure.
Busting out headphones.
Yeah, you're fine. No, but I agree. I think it's an interesting way to think about it, right? Hey, if you can solve 80% of the problems with a tool that's free or easier to use and actually gives your engineers somewhere else to go, then you're probably better off than a 100% tool that is twice the cost and 3 times the effort or whatever else it is. I know in information security, especially like on Twitter and other places, that everyone wants the full blown solution, and that's just not realistic, right? Like we only have 2 weeks to review 2 million lines of code, right? That's the realistic approach that we're taking on things, and so we've got to make a best effort somewhere. So those tools, that's where it becomes useful. So along those lines, right? I know you've spent a lot of time in the DevSecOps space lately. What is it like from a tooling perspective? What is it that you recommend? I mean, I know you're talking about custom tooling. You're talking about custom scripts. Obviously, there's going to be some code involved there, but are there kind of core pieces that you look at as, hey, this is extremely useful from a DevSecOps perspective?
Yeah. So
I know that's a broad question, so but wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah. So one thing that I've noticed pretty consistently at a number of companies, which I think is super interesting and actually flies in the face of what I think the security industry has focused on for like ever, is that preventing classes of bugs is much easier than finding bugs. So there's been a huge amount of vendors and tooling and all sorts of things, like fuzzing, static analysis, dynamic analysis. Like there's been so much work in finding bugs, but I think that what I've seen at companies who've really done an effective job at solving classes of bugs, it's all about making secure wrapper libraries, having them be very easy to use, getting them widely adopted, and as Netflix likes to say, basically building a smooth paved road for developers such that they, if you just use the nice ecosystem and developer productivity tools that you've built for them, they just never think about security, right? Like output encoding is happening by default. All the services have MTLS between them. Authorization and authentication are mostly handled. You just have to specify 1 or 2 config files, and then it just does the right thing. That is really, I think, it's not the sexy answer, but I think it's the practical answer that actually works, based on what I've seen at a bunch of companies.
That makes sense, right? So you're saying there's not necessarily a tool; it's just an approach to DevSecOps that actually eliminates the classes of vulnerabilities, as opposed to, hey, I went out and bought, Rapid7 or whatever, and that solved all the problems for me.
Yeah, I think the companies who've had real long-term sustainable wins, I think, have focused on eliminating classes of issues rather than individual bugs. And most tools that find bugs are inherently sort of like whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
Right. It's you can maybe find more bugs and maybe you even find them effectively, but I put this meme from, I think, The Social Network, where it's Justin Timberlake saying what's cooler than $1 million, 1 billion users or whatever. Yeah. So I changed that to what's cooler than finding a bunch of bugs, like eliminating classes of bugs.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I just want to add to that. Like that was because actually when we were talking to Secure Code Warrior, which we will have their CTO on here, I guess within the next month or a few weeks. Anyways, so he's going to be on. But yeah, when I was talking to them, we were like, well, we need this custom content. And they're kind of like, why? And we were like, well, to solve, like you said, classes of vulnerabilities, we built our own parts of the application that you use, and we've overwritten, Rails methods to do things securely. And like for us, we can't always just give you your standard, well, this is how you fix it type solution, when ours, again, to completely eliminate a class of bugs, for instance, XSS in Markdown, there's a whole pipeline we built. We've implemented CSP. Like there's definitely, and then like with CSRF, to eliminate CSRF, but also not on purpose, but it also, I wouldn't say it eliminated IDOR completely, but our CSRF is based off of the HTTP path. So like your token, if you were to like change some sort of value like in the URL, the CSRF token wouldn't be valid anymore, which has been interesting because because like let's say you want to go and exploit something and it's like a post request that requires, or a put or whatever requires that token, then like the IDOR it doesn't work because your CSRF token doesn't match up with the HTTP path. Man, I can't speak. But anyways, like the point is that there's been a lot of work to just like eliminate classes of bugs, and that has been long-term the most effective way for us to go about it. So there's definitely other stuff that's going to pop up, and like authorization is one of those things where it's like I feel like that's a super hard to just solve class of bug because it can manifest in so many different ways. But yeah, I completely agree. Like that's an effective way to run an AppSec program, or focus on fixing things.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, so shamelessly, I would love to ask you more about what sort of bugs have you guys squashed, like classes that is, and how did you do it? So I think tying the request path to the current CSRF token, that's pretty cool. And I think you interviewed another person from GitHub like a number of podcasts ago, and I think they talked about writing some like
probably Greg Osa, my boss, I think maybe.
So yeah, do you mind like spilling some beans? You don't have to if you're not allowed, but just like what are like a handful of either libraries you wrote or maybe policies or practices you changed that have been super effective in like squashing classes of bugs?
Yeah. So, and I wouldn't say, and to be clear, I know you mean GitHub in general, not just me, because it's definitely not me that solved this stuff. GitHub. So for instance, our product security team, one thing people struggle with is crypto. So they built an easy out of the box solution for pretty much any crypto need that you might have. So I should say basic as in like, okay, if you get into something, this is true with any solution, if you get into something super, super specific and down in the weeds and like you need something ultra edge casey, well, okay, it's not going to fit. But for the most part, for 99% of uses, it's an easy way to just get going with, not including creds in your source code or doing some sort of HMAC, based comparison or whatever use case you might have, which is another thing like for webhook service to service calls. I was just thinking of webhook as one of those avenues, but like service to service calls, having a standardized library to do internal service to service calls in an authenticated manner and keep the infrastructure sane, which is another thing when it comes to like, so we've used Kubernetes and Puppet and a few other things, and this is like more SecOps type land, but they've done quite a bit to make it such that it's very hard to introduce SSRF and it actually mean that you reach a bunch of different places within the application, which is another area that we talk a lot about, is SSRF prevention. There's another class, which is like, and I think we had a developer from Segment on maybe a year ago or so, or definitely within the last year, who talked about their solution, which was at a low level, networking level, like preventing SSRF through, and specifically DNS rebinding with SSRF. And we're no different. We obviously like have a solution to not for like DNS rebinding necessarily, but SSRF from a networking standpoint, which kind of plays into what I talked about with SecOps. So I guess like if I had to zoom out, I'd say like, dealing with crypto, preventing SSRF at like a network level, CSRF, doing service to service auth call, or like authenticated service to service calls, both authorized and authentication, auth-C, auth-N, and what was the other thing? Oh yeah, XSS. Which even if XSS is introduced somehow, like I said, with CSP and also with different, not only different subdomains, but different domains entirely from github.com. Like when you go to upload a file, you'll notice that goes to GitHub usercontent.com. So doing sort of like sandboxing. And like the other like biggest thing that we do is we do not allow third-party JavaScript in github.com. We just don't. And then from that point, if you want, like we've had before where someone's like, oh, we want to have this widget. Well, you're going to iframe, we're going to sandbox, and we're going to have like controls there so that it's not actually on our domain and it's not actually out of our control. So yeah, it's a whole class of things that we're slowly trying to break down and like build for. So.
Yeah. And I think that, nice. I mean, it goes to what you're talking about, Clint, right? Like they've identified, and I know talking to Neil and others on Ken's team over there, that seems to be their approach is, and this is what you were saying about successful application security programs, but the approach has been, what is it that we're concerned about, right? Okay, number one, let's talk about cross-site scripting and how much of that comes in. Okay, are there other approaches that we could take besides just your regular, okay, we're just doing encoding where there may be problems with that. What if we just implement CSP, right? That like, okay, that takes care of most of it because that takes care of that huge threat. And then we do have to worry about where input is and where we're storing things. But at the very least, we've kind of taken away the whole, you're pulling things from a different source and loading Mage card up or whatever in. Like we've seen multiple of those happen over the last week, right? With
Seth was sending me Mage cart links last night.
Yeah, I was.
He's like, "Hey man, look at this." I'm like,
"Check this out." Cool. Yeah, somebody got owned. But it's that whole like kind of risk prioritization that we have to do across the board, and I think that's where DevSecOps comes into play, is knowing what it is that you are concerned about or the organization is concerned about. That doesn't necessarily line up with what's happening at Black Hat and DEF CON, right? It really doesn't.
Oftentimes it doesn't at all.
Yeah.
It's like, we could like prevent against these like crazy nation state O days, or I don't know, we could like update our servers because we've got like an old version of something known vulnerable.
Yep. So
I do have one question before we get off, Seth.
Okay.
About Clint's work with the, because Clint's doing the review board for like AppSec Cali, for CactusCon, for B-Sides, for RSA. So like, or sorry, not for RSA, for, oh God, I know this, I forget.
DevSecCon?
Yes, sorry, that's the one, which I should know because we're going to DevSecCon here in a couple weeks.
Nice.
But yeah, it's going to be cool. Or is it DevSecOps? I don't remember what it is. Anyways, the point is you've done a
maybe. Yeah.
DevSec. That's what it is. I'm sorry, I was wrong. DevSecOps days. Yeah. No. So what I was going to ask though is like, we want to, for people that maybe are like on the fence with submitting, papers, and like they're like, oh, I want to submit to Speak, but I don't necessarily know like what are the good qualities of a submission. I did want to just real quickly have you maybe give a few pointers on like writing a successful submission.
Yeah, sure. And I've been aggregating some links about other people who I think have said good things in this space, which I'll send you so you can share with people.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'll give you like a couple of things I've noticed based on reading like hundreds of submissions across probably 4 or 5 different conferences. I think one thing is before you submit, like look at the conference and like look at the description for the CFP, like go to maybe last year and like look at some of the accepted talks and try to get an idea of what sort of conference it is and what sort of things they care about. Because it varies by conference, right? So, Black Hat's looking for like super cool, cutting edge emphasis on like offensive security, where like OWASP type conferences, if you're like, here's an awesome, iMessage ODay I found, they're going to be like, cool, like, I don't care.
Yeah.
So and for example, like we've had a number of submissions to DevSecCon that are like not about DevSecOps. So I'm like, I don't know why you're like, I don't know, writing about like video game programming and submitting to DevSecCon. Like, I don't know why you're doing this. A number of people also don't necessarily describe in detail what they're planning to talk about. So as a person, like, I guess something to keep in mind is like when you're submitting, like giving someone a slot in the conference, you want to make sure that people who show up to the conference get value from their time. So you want to make sure that the talks are useful and valuable and have like actionable takeaways. So there's been a number of times where a submission like sounds good, but based on the contents in the submission, it's unclear if they can sort of back up what they're claiming. It's like, yeah, this is kind of a cool idea, but like it could also be bad. So like taking the time to, not just in the abstract, but in the outline, usually there's like an outline or extended description section, just providing like details in as much specificity as possible, what you plan to cover and why it's important, linking to other related work, and just sort of making it clear that you've done your due diligence and you are experienced and have the background to give a talk at whatever you're proposing. You'd be surprised how few people do that. So the people who do really stand out. So yeah, and there's like a bunch of other stuff, but yeah, I would say like understand what the conference is looking for and provide sufficient detail such that they'll know that like, oh, this person like will give a good talk. Because if you think about it, like why would you spend say tens or like 100 hours building like a really good tool or doing some cool research and then spend like 20 minutes on the submission, right? Because like the conference organizers don't know how much time you've spent on it, right? So I would say don't unfairly like not give enough time to the CFP submission. Like give yourself as much opportunity to succeed as possible by putting in at least like an hour or two. I sometimes spend a couple of hours per CFP submission when I'm submitting. So you don't have to do it that long, but just like don't spend 200 hours working on something and then like 10 minutes writing the CFP, because you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. And also like some people are like, oh, I am not sure if this is good enough. I don't know if people will like it. I would say let the conference organizers turn you down rather than you. Like just submit anyway. I've had some talks that I thought were like mediocre get accepted, and some that I thought were really good get rejected. So there's a lot of factors outside of your control that you have no insight into. So I don't know. That's a bunch of words.
No. It definitely it's definitely helpful. And like the best, I mean, I have friends that are really good speakers, really popular speakers. Like if the person, like if you know who these people are, like they have better. I feel like they have better chances just because like because as a somebody reading papers, you sometimes know who the person is whose stuff that you're reading, and other times it's a blind deal, so you have no idea. Yeah. But in the case where they know this person, like they probably will get accepted, and they'll still send me an invite to do suggested editing and be like, hey, I'd like feedback on my abstract. Like they still go through that process every time they submit a talk, of going to their peers and being like, hey, what do you think of this, and getting feedback and taking it in. So if like it's especially if it's like your first time or you're under 10, I'd say under 10, like it's always a good idea to do it, but especially like get feedback from people on what you're submitting before it's submitted. But no, I think that information you provide is really helpful, because the way you're explaining it, Clint, is you're like basically saying, put yourself in my shoes and think about what and don't shoot yourself down. Don't I see people do that too. You're right. Like oh, I don't know if it's good enough. Well, like and just because you got rejected doesn't mean it's not good enough. Just maybe it's not right for that conference. So keep that in mind too. Just keep trying.
Yeah, with regards to shooting yourself down, there were a couple of people from my office last year who were like, I don't know, this is okay. Like, I don't know if I should submit it. So I really pushed them to submit to like all the Vegas conferences, and like they wouldn't have submitted at all, but they ended up, there were like 2 different or maybe 3 different projects that gave a couple of talks each at like B-Sides Las Vegas and DEF CON. So they didn't think it was worth submitting at all, and then they were speaking at like top Vegas conferences. So
there you go.
Just believe in yourself.
Yep. Yeah, it's worth the risk, right? Yeah. So, for sure.
Yes, for sure.
Well, good. So, Clint, I feel like we could keep going for hours if we wanted to, but
Probably.
we are just over an hour that we've been talking. So, as far as like, we always like to ask guests where they're going to be next or how people can interact with them. So obviously DRSec, right? We pushed that, but are you going to be at any upcoming conferences where people could meet you and talk to you?
So I'm going to be giving a talk at AppSec Cali towards the end of January in 2020. I'm also going to be giving some talks at B-Sides SF and RSA. I think that's like February. At Clint Gibler on Twitter. I'm always happy to chat with people. TLDRSec is bit.ly/TLDRSEC. Or just like shoot me an email. I'm always happy to chat with people.
Cool. Okay, good. Well, we appreciate the time. We appreciate you, coming on and chatting with us.
Thanks for having me. It's been super fun.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime, after, maybe
sure.
dive into some other topics as well. So appreciate it.
Yeah.
Ken, anything else last minute that we need to cover before we...
Nope. Just don't hop right off, Clint. But thanks to listeners, thanks to you, Clint, and
we'll be back next week. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and I can give me 1 second. I probably can tell you who's next week. Actually, next week we don't have anyone scheduled, so that should be.
So
we'll probably just do
Christmas
a gossip
episode.
talk.
Yeah, it's our Christmas episode. There
We
you
usually
go.
turn ones that don't have guests into just pure, straight up gossip. So we'll probably do like a this year in review and InfoSec drama or something funny.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be good times.
Sweet. All right.
I'm
thanks, everybody.
Kidding, mostly kidding, kind of. All right.
Sounds good.
Later.
All right. Later.